Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. Today, I need a hero, and only heroes hit the like and subscribe buttons down below. That said, our first story of the day is by Boston Pilot. That time I employed the Worcester Sheriff to bring the Worcester Police to court. This is really old, but I get reminded about it reading another story here. Years ago, I got a speeding ticket in Worcester, Massachusetts. Yes, Worcester. It was a typical speed trap where they sit at the bottom of a steep hill, knowing that lots of people will exceed the very low speed limit because gravity. It was kind of BS, so I decided to fight it and at least make them work for their $100 fine. I read everything I could on fighting radar tickets, and one strategy was to check whether the police department had proper FCC documents on the radar used. If they don't, the radar info is inadmissible, and you probably win your case. I went to the Worcester Police Station and found the records department down in the basement. I showed them the ticket and explained that I wanted to view the paperwork for the radar that was used to record my speed. I had to wait a couple of minutes, but some official came out and sternly informed me that civilians don't have access to that information. Cue malicious compliance. I asked a few people how you request records for a court case, and it turns out that, at least in Massachusetts, that's one of the things the sheriff's office does. So I went to them, paid the $50. I know, on a $100 ticket, but I've always enjoyed tilting at windmills and described the documents I required. I have to admit that by the time I had to go to court, I had kind of forgotten about the sheriff's department. But I did notice this police officer sitting in the audience section with all the other people fighting tickets. This guy wasn't your typical police officer though. He was wearing a very fancy uniform, and his hat had all kinds of gold braid on it. He did not look happy. Traffic court being traffic court, it's all kinds of disorganized with a bunch of citizens sitting around waiting for things to start, and of course the proceedings plod along at a snail's pace. Finally, my name's called after about half an hour, and this police officer comes over to me and explains that he is the captain or lieutenant, I forget now, in charge of the entire records division for the Worcester Police, and he has the radar records in his hand for me to examine. So I look it over, and it seems to all be in order, so I thank him. He's visibly angry about having to spend his morning sitting in traffic court over a $100 citation, totally worth the $50. To this day, I don't know whether someone at the sheriff's department was just messing with the police department by naming the top guy in the records request, but I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. Don't want to let the citizens see your records? Fine. I would have loved to have been there when the sheriff's department showed up to serve the head guy with a court order. Oh, by the way, I lost the case. Do you think you would ever be petty enough to spend $50 and waste a day or two of your time to go to court to get these records and, well, waste a day or two of the sheriff's time as well? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by Good Time Charlie. Roger that. In 2007, I joined the Navy. I was 26. 2008, we went on deployment, and I was a lowly E3, so most of the guys I worked with were like 18 and pretty timid yes men. Had a first class E6 who was just trying to ride out his time till retirement. Our chief stayed on his butt, and when he got his butt chewed, it rolled downhill. We spent most of that deployment doing ignorant stuff like painting in the rain, mopping in the rain, painting spaces just to have to paint them again in a month. Me and another guy were supposed to paint a fan room for an upcoming inspection. It didn't really need to be painted, but for some reason in the military, it's a high crime for someone to have any downtime whatsoever. First class brought us over to the space that we were supposed to paint, and he opened the door and said, "I want this whole freaking room painted white, do you understand?" Sure thing, petty officer, we'll take care of it. He left to go sit in his chair for the day. A fan room is not entirely white, just the walls and ceiling. The floors are dark gray, and there's different colored pipes and stenciling on the pipes and directional arrows. That's not what he said though. He said freaking white. So me and my buddy opened a 5-gallon can of white paint, and every single square inch of that fan room was painted white. Floor, walls, piping, ceiling, machinery, everything. About 8 p.m. we went to the office and let him know we were done and awaiting his approval. We were standing by. He and another first class walk up, and we knew it was coming. We also knew that he was going to have to explain it too. He opened the door, and it was so bright he could have gotten retinal burn. He closed the door and paused. Opened the door again, looked around again, and closed the door. He asked if we knew the floor was supposed to be gray and the piping stenciled. "Yes, petty officer." He says, "That's not what I told you to do though, was it?" "No, petty officer, it wasn't." They look at each other and they knew they messed up. They weren't even mad. He just said, "Let's let this paint dry and in a few days, we'll fix the floor and piping." We ended up not even having to do it as he tasked someone else with the job. After that, I didn't get forced into doing stupid BS anymore. You gotta love the details that this petty officer had though. The second door check, as if opening it a second time would magically revert it back to the way it was supposed to be. The dejected and immediate realization that they told them to do specifically what they did, and asking them, "I told you to do that, didn't I?" He might have been annoying at first, but you really come to love this character by the end. Our next story is by Flatten Innertube, Malicious Compliance, on September 11th, 2001. As a regional manager for a fluid process equipment manufacturer, part of my responsibilities included training our distributors on new and existing product. Said manufacturer was in Iowa. I lived in the southeast US. My boss and I had planned a training visit to our distributor located in New Jersey, in a town about 20 miles from Manhattan. This Iowa company was extremely frugal, to the point of making me fly into LaGuardia rather than Newark Airport because the LaGuardia airfare was $15 cheaper. Tolls be darned. So I flew into LaGuardia, rented a car, and drove over to our hotel in New Jersey. My boss flew into Newark Airport from Iowa, and we met for dinner that night. The next morning, we got into my rental car and drove to the distributor office. We had just started training when the 9/11 attack occurred. Every person in that building knew somebody that worked within a block of the World Trade Center. A husband, a wife, a child, a neighbor, somebody that worked within a block of the buildings. I only hope that I never see faces on people like I saw that morning. One fellow's daughter worked across the street from the World Trade Center. He didn't hear from her for almost 3 hours. She was okay, she had walked up to the ferry at 33rd Street and got into New Jersey that way. But her father's face was white with fear and abject horror over what might have happened to his daughter. So my boss, in addition to being so cheap he would squeeze a nickel till Jefferson farted, was also a heartless jerk. His planned trip that week was that morning in New Jersey, then proceed with another guy up into New England to do more training, and then fly to Charlotte to finish the training at yet a third distributor. I convinced him that none of this was likely to happen, especially since all the Hudson River bridges were closed, and he couldn't get to New England at that point, even if he really wanted to. I convinced him to get in the rental car with me, and we would start making our way to the west. In this company's weird thinking, the account manager responsible for the Charlotte distributor was a good man from Philadelphia. And when I say from Philadelphia, he was 100% Philadelphia and everything that goes with it. My cheap boss, too cheap for his own mobile phone despite being the vice president of sales for the Americas, used my cell phone to call Joe from Philadelphia and to arrange for Joe to meet us someplace so he could proceed to Charlotte with Joe and do this training. This is where the heartless jerk part really showed itself, where all he could think of was this BS training and not what just happened that morning. Joe, being from Philadelphia, told my boss in no uncertain and very colorful terms what he could do with this idea. Joe was in his car and driving home to Philadelphia to be with his family. My boss could go fornicate himself, and that was the end of that discussion. My thought was to proceed to Harrisburg and then turn south on 81, the idea being to get a hotel room somewhere south. Winchester, Virginia was my plan. We'd get the car and me home, and then he could take the car back to Iowa. We tried to find him a rental car that he could drive to Iowa around Harrisburg. Of course, there were none to be had. The only thing available was a one-way U-Haul rental for almost $600. This is the point where him being a miserable cheapskate kicks in. He simply wasn't going to spend that kind of money. The radio was also saying that the flights were going to resume midday on Wednesday, and he latched onto that. This is where the malicious compliance comes in. He said that rather than go with me farther south to go back to Iowa, that I leave him at a Best Western hotel right off of the Pennsylvania Turnpike at the Susquehanna River. Back then, the only thing at that exit besides the hotel were 2 fast food joints and 2 convenience stores. I tried to talk him out of this idea, but he insisted. At that point, I said, screw it. You chose this bed, you lie in it. I left him at the tired-looking Best Western and headed south toward my home. My boss was trapped in that hotel until Friday afternoon when a rental car in the area finally became available at the money he was willing to spend. He got home at 2 a.m. Saturday morning. First of all, I think it goes without saying that if an event like that happens, I feel like almost everything comes to a stop for a couple days at least. And not to mention, how are you trying to get affordable travel back home from New York/New Jersey in the midst of such a monumental event, where all airfares canceled and everybody that was ever visiting there is definitely trying to get back home? It's just a moment that really shows the guy's true colors and kind of how callous they feel towards humanity. That doesn't directly affect them or their family. This next story is by Untimely Manners. Fine, you can come collect it tomorrow. Years ago, I crashed my motorbike. My fault, and I did bend a fork and some cosmetic damage like a broken mirror, broken kickstand. I had always dealt with the same motorbike store for parts, and they were always really good to me, so I assumed they would help me with repairing my bike. I took it in and originally told no time frame for repairs. I agree since they don't know what damage there is yet. Originally, I get a call that both forks were bent and so on, and told $800. 2 months later, I ring saying, "Hey, what's going on?" and was told the forks never arrived, they'll have to reorder. A month goes by, I ring back and told, still waiting on the order. Another month, was told they didn't have the time to pull the bike apart to check out the damage, price is now $1,500. Another month, the forks only just arrived and they'll order the rest of the parts. I'll skip ahead here, but basically this had stretched to 7 months and was now up to $2,000. I ring back saying this has gone on for too long, you're taking the piss. I'm coming in tomorrow to take my bike back and you better have it ready. I walk to the store and can't find my bike. The mechanic couldn't even recall working on it. Was told it may be on display in the store. I walk in, my bike is on display and had been for the past week. I go to the counter to say that's my bike, I want it. They can't find the receipt. I say, yeah, you might want to look further, you kept it for 7 months. They eventually find it and say, did you get a new battery? I said yes. The guy I'd been dealing with had not been keeping up his tally and I was only being charged for a new battery. The counter staff asked why we had the bike for so long. I said, no idea, you just kept it. They tried to ring the owner I was dealing with, however, his phone was off as he was at the dentist's. I said I want my bike now, so I paid for the battery and rode off. The owner tried calling me for weeks afterwards. I kept hanging up. Now, I'm not a lawyer here, so I don't know the legality of what OP just did. Like, even though they kept it for 7 months, they still did some restoration work on it and all that stuff was unpaid for as they only paid for the battery. Again, I just wouldn't know the legality of it. I guess they probably have a receipt, paying to get it back, I don't know. And our final story of the day is by Griselda Loves Cats. Think before you ground me. I was a pretty good kid. I got good grades without my parents having to pressure me. I didn't get many calls home from school. I was polite and well behaved around most people most of the time. I was very careful to make sure any mischief I got up to was not discovered by adults. I did a lot of instigating though. I don't remember what I did that upset Dad, but he wasn't the easiest person to predict, so it might have been something or it might have been nothing. Important to the story, Dad worked roughly 70 miles away, so he didn't get home early. Mom worked in our town, but she wasn't usually home until a couple of hours after I got out of school. Dad grounded me for a week for whatever it was. I remember wondering how he would ever know what I did because nobody was ever home after school but my brother and I. Bro would have ratted me out, but I had so much hard evidence of stuff that he was into that was way worse than anything I ever did. Drugs, drinking, going to parties and coming home drunk and stoned, stealing, and so many more things. So he was never going to rat me out. 3 days after I'm grounded, it's the weekend. Dad wants me to go and get something from the store. It was walking distance away. Dad mostly didn't want to get up and go get it. He also wants me to go to a friend's house or go do something so we can have some time alone. Hey, we all need our own space. But I'm grounded. Sorry, Dad. I can't make dinner tonight because we're out of X, Y, and Z. I would go get stuff, but I'm grounded. I can't go anywhere until I'm no longer grounded. You said that no matter what, I am grounded to this house for a week. That means I can't go run your errands, and I can't get out of your hair. He never grounded me again. And I did not honor the grounding on days he worked. He was a teacher, so it was Monday to Friday. I did get high score on my favorite video game at the arcade that week. He did take care of dinner that night. He cooked, which at the time meant calling a local pizza place for delivery. Thankfully, he didn't actually try to cook at that time. If mom wasn't home, I cooked because dad's cooking was atrocious. I still have nightmares about his cooking. As a kid who got grounded plenty of times, but the sentence, you could say, was always forgotten about within a day or two, I particularly enjoy these stories where they hold those parents to their words and they say, "No, you said you were gonna ground me, so I'm grounded and I can't do that. I'm sorry, Father, but you must do this without me." But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.